The F1 driver market is an ever-evolving beast, and as more seats get locked in, we get a better idea of where to look next and who might be on the move or who might be vulnerable from falling off the grid entirely for 2025. Scott, since the three of us last discussed the driver market on the channel, the big moves have been Fernando Alonso deciding to stay with Aston Martin and Audi making its first signing, which is Nico Hülkenberg. So how does that change the playing field for the rest of the driver market and all the people who don't have deals for next year yet?
Yeah, obviously it takes away two desirable seats. It's maybe a couple of moves that we thought were probably quite likely, but that doesn't change anything. If you're sniffing around for those seats, you're hoping, you're not expecting anything. You're really hoping that things are going to move in your favour. That's not happened, so we can add Alonso and Hülkenberg in their respective seats to the likes of Lewis Hamilton's move to Ferrari, and being something that we know for sure is going to happen next year. And already that means that in a normal season, this would be quite a good amount of driver market activity. We'd probably be most of the way there in terms of setting the 25 grid. It'd be really early in the season to be at that phase, but it would be quite healthy. But the amount of potential turnover this year or change, the volatility of the driver market is bigger than usual. So we might only be halfway to being resolved. I think there are multiple more, not just seats to be filled, but potential changes coming as well. And there are even some scenarios where if the most dramatic things happened, the grid next year could be 50% of the places on it could be different or filled by different drivers than they are at the moment.
Oh, I love that. I really hope that happens, especially after we had no changes for the first time in F1 history coming into this season. But Ben, there's a couple of things that Scott mentioned there. Firstly, that deals are being done early, which we don't necessarily always see. And he also mentioned Hamilton knowing ahead of the season that he was going to Ferrari. We've got a few drivers, haven't we, who know that they're changing and have got to do effectively a whole season or the bulk of a season with a team that they know they're leaving. Does that create any awkward situations or any tension for these drivers? How do we expect them to deal with that?
It definitely has the potential to. It's all related to the individual power dynamics. So if you're like Lewis and you're moving to pastures new and the new pasture is better, you drive with complete freedom. He won't be moping around thinking, oh, I've got to do another however many years at Mercedes. He can drive freely. Hulkenberg's the same. He's banked a contract. If you don't have your next destination sorted, then you have kind of a double pressure situation where the team you're in doesn't really want you around. That creates pressure, but also you don't know what you're doing next. So that creates extra pressure on you to perform. And then you can end up in a situation which is kind of between those two stalls. If you're Carlos Sainz, you're going to be somewhere, but you don't know where yet. So you need to keep performing and doing what's best for yourself. That creates tension with your team in certain situations, especially when you're racing your teammate. But equally, if you're in a marginal situation in a race where you need the team's help, you aren't going to get it because you are no longer their priority. So a very tricky situation to manage at both ends of the spectrum, really.
Now, Scott, there is a worse situation than I think we can safely say Carlos Sainz is going to be on the grid somewhere. He just doesn't know where it is yet. There's a worse situation for some drivers on the grid who probably are fearing for their place in F1 for next year. Who would we class in that category at the moment?
So the absolute nailed-on contenders to drop off the grid are fairly obvious, I think. Logan Sargeant and Zhou Guanyu. Sargent's situation is so precarious that there's even intense speculation, and we've contributed to that now with our own video on the subject, that he could lose his seat in season. Zhou's situation is precarious because unlike Valtteri Bottas, the other Sauber driver, Zhou doesn't really have the same kind of wealth of reasons to keep him on. And the Sauber situation is, I think, one of the most interesting in that you've got two drivers there. They know that absolutely guaranteed one of them loses their drive. Very possibly both do, which is such an odd position to be in May. But Zhou's the one who has more to worry about because he's not as experienced, he's not a race winner, he's not as fast. So you've got two drivers there who I think are properly fighting for their F1 futures already, but are as good as out the door unless something changes. But you do have one or two others for whom, if places move and they end up on the Sainz is incredibly unlikely, but it's a non-zero chance that everything evaporates. That he's always just the second priority for every team, and he waits too long and he throws away the Audi seat and all of that. but you've also got other drivers like a Bottas or a Kevin Magnussen who could disappear because if they get dropped by their current team, someone else might not want to pick them up.
So I think we've got some drivers who we have an idea of what's going to happen to them, whether it's, they're going to find a drive or they're probably on the way out. But there's this big cluster, isn't there, in the middle of guys who don't have their futures resolved. And actually, it's quite difficult to work out where they're going to end up.
Yes, so with the with this group, you have a mix of drivers. They're all in the same kind of inherent position, but they're all performing differently, and they've got different levels of options within that. So two of the more interesting ones that I see are Esteban Ocon and Yuki Tsunoda, both drivers who theoretically could continue with their current teams, not indefinitely, but certainly for the foreseeable future. Ocon's been at the Renault Works team for what feels like forever now. And Tsunoda is a Red Bull-backed driver, a Honda-backed driver in a team that is going to use Honda engines for next season as well, and is also performing really well. Both of them are performing really well and outperforming their respective teammates. Why would they leave? And where else would they go? But they're in different situations from the others who don't know what their futures are beyond 24, because Ocon's been at Alpine, as I say, for quite a while now, and I think a change of scenery would be probably good for both. Ocon is very popular in one sense, but he's also an intense driver, intense character, and Alpine and Renault in their various forms haven't lived up to expectations. So I can see him wanting elsewhere, and he's certainly driving at a level that demands more than what Alpine can offer.
He's entitled to be fed up now, isn't he?
Absolutely. So, and speaking to people in the paddock, of the two Alpine drivers, because it's not impossible Pierre Gasly moves on. I've heard some stories that his management are sniffing around too. Ocon seems the most likely to move on, and Alpine seem more likely to be in need of a replacement for him specifically. So I can see something happening there. On Tsunoda's side, he's got the clock ticking now in that he's definitely not got a Red Bull Racing future because nobody seems to take him seriously there. And he knows that his main backer Honda is moving to another team, Aston Martin, for 2026. That's going to be difficult to get in because Fernando Alonso's renewed and Lance Stroll is the son of the team owner. So that could be something that just doesn't open up for him, in which case, does he need to get out of the Red Bull family a bit early to find something for himself in the medium term? And that's
because
where
surely he's vulnerable. He's vulnerable for 26 regardless, I guess,
yes,
in terms of Red Bull 2.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have a situation there where I think he is better off finding another home for himself and basically striking out as a driver on his own merits rather than just because he's a Red Bull Junior or Honda backed or whatever. So you're hearing his name start to crop up in connection with Alpine, for example. But I also wouldn't rule out a move to a team like Haas, because I think Haas has a lot more appeal right now than it did, say, 6 months ago, where you would imagine nobody would have wanted to move to that team.
Yeah, the Haas situation is remarkable, really. Complete turnaround, like Scott said. And normally, someone like Kevin Magnussen, who is an incumbent driver, experienced, well-known within the team, when your teammate, Nico Hulkenberg, is disappearing off to another team, that should strengthen
jackpot.
your position in the market. Yeah, jackpot. I'm the incumbent. I'm the reference. I'm the guy they're definitely going to want to keep around because they're losing the other guy who they quite rated. But actually, the reverse is the case. There's so much fluctuation elsewhere in the market. Has become such a desirable option in the midfield. They could change both drivers quite easily and, in fact, have an abundance of options to fill those two seats. So suddenly, Kevin Magnussen, he's having a bonus F1 career now, let's face it, from looking quite solid, he's actually potentially on the verge of dropping off the grid too.
I can see a scenario there where you have Bottas, Tsunoda, Magnussen sort of fighting over that seat, and there'll be for different reasons as well. For one or two of them, maybe it's any port in a storm. For another, it's actually this is somewhere that could work for me in the medium term. When you factor in the young drivers that are coming up, so Ollie Behrman, who will be in one of those Haas seats, that is basically take that as read that he will be in a Haas next season. Where Antonelli ends up, whether it's at Mercedes or in at Williams, what Alex Albon does, because he's a driver who he needs to be aiming for a top 10 seat, absolutely, but where are the top 10 seats? So then does he need to get out of Williams and go somewhere else? And if he wants to leave Williams, is he better off leaving now or in 12 months' time for the 2026 rules? So Haas could have an interesting role to play there. Alpine is still a works team, so it just still inherently appeals to people, even though it continues to underachieve. It's absolutely fast. There's so many drivers and also so many teams in different positions as well. That's why I think there's the potential for so much change. Because I've never seen a volatility like this, and it's because the options for driver and for teams is probably bigger than it's ever been.